Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there. Hey there, there's something I'd like to mention before the episode starts. Dr. Lozano has generously agreed to offer any of my Grief to Growth listeners 10% off a single session between now and the end of 2021. So if you're listening to this in 2021 and you'd like to schedule a session with Dr. Lozano, just mention Grief to Growth and she'll give you 10% off a single session. A couple things is, other thing I wanted to mention is I talked about some things that have been happening in my life that kind of validated this experience. And one of the things I want to mention, this was really wild. So in my experience, I had someone in my life named Joanna in my past life. This person played a very, very important role in my life. In fact, they kind of played a pivotal role in my life changed after this person and I were separated. So the name Joanna is not a very common name in my life. I only know a couple of people named Joanna. Now, I did my session on Saturday. On Sunday, I looked into my schedule and I had someone scheduled to do a session with me on Monday. And the person's name happened to be Joanna. So I thought that was a very interesting synchronicity, I think, to validate the experience that I had. I've never had a client before named Joanna. I had never met this person before. I had no idea that they were scheduling a session with me. So those are the little types of things that kind of validate what I went through in my experience. So with that, I'll let you get into the episode.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth Podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
Hey, everybody. This is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me Dr. Vondie Lozano. And I guess I should call her Dr. Lozano, but I feel like we're like friends because, first of all, we are 2 days apart, I think, in birth. We were actually born the same year, like 2 days apart. And I've spent hours with Dr. Lozano because I actually did a Life Between Lives session with her. And we're going to talk about what that is today. But I'm going to introduce her, and then we're going to have a conversation. Vondie is a Life Between Lives hypnotherapist. She's also a licensed marriage and family therapist and a former psychology professor who's been featured in Cosmopolitan, the Wall Street Journal, and on KABC Talk Radio. And I met Dr. Lozano when she contacted me about this Life Between Life sessions that she does. And I've always been kind of interested in it, but not really willing to pull the trigger because, frankly, I didn't know if it would work for me. So we agreed to have a couple of sessions where she actually led me through that. So we're going to talk about that later on the podcast, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But with that, I'd like to welcome to Grief to Growth, Dr. Vondie Lozano.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, thanks for being here.
And of course, I want to look down at your eyes, but I know I'm supposed to look up at the camera, so we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, that's fine. It's all good. So I know we want to start out today and set an intention like we did with the sessions that we did. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Okay. Well, especially since we're going to be sharing some of your stuff, I'm nervous. I'm repeating myself. I just wanted to invite in the light and love of spirit and ask that our path be blessed and illuminated. See, I got the goosebumps. And that whatever we discuss is helpful to you and your listeners and viewers. And and that this is all about love. Ultimately, it's all about love, and that
Awesome.
our time together would be about love.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thanks for doing that, Vondie. Well, as I said, we're going to get into my session a little bit later on, and it was really, really interesting. But I want to talk about you first.
Sure.
And I want to talk about your background. I know your background is psychology professor. You're a marriage and family therapist. So, how did you get into Life Between Lives?
Wow. Trying to think how to succinctly answer that.
Mm-hmm.
I know you said it's okay to ramble, but you have to be careful with me. How I actually got into it wasn't related to my career at all. It was through losing my dog. And I can't remember if I had shared that with you before in kind of our pre-interview, but I come from a Christian background, and I think I mentioned I'd be comfortable sharing about that if that's helpful. Mm-hmm. But I come from a Christian background, and yet my whole family is kind of intuitive, for lack of a better word, and just kind of has feelings about things. And I, even as a kid, had sensations and probably what I would now call like touch-ins, but they always just scared the crap out of me, because from the Christian perspective, that's all bad, and not just bad, that's like scary bad. Mm-hmm. So it was actually, I started opening up, see, I'm rambling, when I had an illness around age 30, a really serious illness. And I went to see a holistic healer. And this poor thing, she was so patient with me, because it was so hard for me and I was teaching at a Christian college. I later worked at a church. I mean, I never quite fit with all of that, but I tried hard to fit with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she had to be really patient with me, but it was the only thing that helped me get better. So I turned to alternative healing. I had chronic fatigue syndrome, and this is 30 years ago, where nobody knew what it was, and people thought it was in your imagination. Mm-hmm. So I was told, so one person told me, sign up for permanent disability, you'll never work again. And I sort of rejected all that, and real doctors didn't know what to do with it. So I went the alternative route. Anyway, while I was working with her as part of my healing, and maybe other people have had this, I started to have really colorful dreams. And I also, and some of these things I haven't said in public before, I also would hear voices. And, in my field, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
But voices like my roommate's voice or my dad's voice. And maybe I would have actually even seen things, but I remember saying, I just don't want to see anything. I just don't want to see anything. Mm-hmm. And later on, I dabbled in mediumship a little bit. And I always wondered if that interfered, because I spent so many years, but I would hear like my dad saying my name, like Vondie, kind of loud. So it was more like somebody touching in. But anyway, I started having dreams. I had a dream, I can say more later if you want, but a dream about a coworker's parent dying. And it was like a video of what happened. And the next day, the video played out. She called me aside and said, I said I wasn't going to talk that much. I was going to make us talk back and forth, and look at me here. Anyway, long story short, the dream played out the next day, except the mom didn't die. And I was just like blown away. Wow. So that was when I started opening up. So fast forward to when I lost my dog. See, even my voice shakes. I was one of those people that I was going to say inappropriate in some words, but an extremely strong attachment to their animals. And so I lost my dog, and I was beside myself with grief. Like, I always tell this story. I took myself to the library the next day because I couldn't go to work and I couldn't be home because everything reminded me of her. And sat in a chair just to be with people. So from that, I had started doing hypnosis, and a hypnosis friend of mine said, let's go see this medium. And that, even in the Bible, it says, do not do that. Like, that word is in there. And so I went to see a medium. My dog came through. She came through first, actually. And connecting with the afterlife was the only thing that gave me any comfort at all.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying to keep my story on track here. And then I even trained with the medium to keep my connection with the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to stop training because I was neglecting my actual life and my actual husband. And then anyway, I feel like I need to speed up here, Vondie. So that's where I learned about Michael Newton's Life Between Life Hypnosis. And I always say, only my little dog could have got me to go that far out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't like, when people minimize relationship with dogs, because we're supposed to say, oh, well, dogs are not, they're just dogs. They're not, they're part of the family. I've had 2 dogs that I've had for a long time. One lived to 11, the other was 14. My first child was a dog because my wife and I would get married. She wanted to have kids. And I was like, let's get a dog instead. So we had a dog 3 years before we had children. So we do form that bond with dogs, that unconditional love, truly unconditional love, that, the dog's always there for you. They never complain, so that bond is very strong. And I find it interesting. I don't do this on purpose, but the name of the show is Grief to Growth. And every time I have someone to tell this story, what got you into whatever this thing is that they're doing now that they're on the program talking about, it's usually some sort of loss. Mm-hmm. It's usually that loss that drives us to that point. And I think it's really interesting you talk about the Christian faith. I grew up with the Christian faith as well. And that faith serves a lot of us until it doesn't. And then something happens where it's like it just doesn't make sense to us anymore. It's just too confined. And then we spread out and we do other things. I know your mother also passed. So did that have something to do with your transition into the mediumship and everything?
Actually she passed more recently, but I felt like because of the work I had done with Michael Newton, we had a way to have a conversation about death and the afterlife before she passed. So it was sort of, I sometimes think that my dog and opening me up was preparing me for losing my mom. Mm-hmm. And my mom was disabled. So the grief wasn't just her death, it was her life. It was a really, really hard life.
Yeah.
But we would talk about Michael Newton's approach and his theory and Michael Newton, for those of you who don't know, he's the one who discovered the Life Between Lives hypnosis. Mm-hmm. But, and I can say a little bit more about that in a minute if you want. But one of the things they found in doing these sessions is that more advanced souls choose harder lives. And my mom was paralyzed as a child and never fully recovered and wasn't supposed to sit up or walk or anything, but she went on to do a lot of those things and even have kids.
Yeah.
But I would say, Mom, I don't know what the hell you were thinking. And she would say, me either, that she had this just really, really, really hard life. So it more helped us have a conversation. And there were some specific conversations, but were you going to ask me something else?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month or, of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode. No, that was fine for that. What I want to do before we get too far in is I want to talk to people. Let's lay some ground rules because sometimes I forget that not everybody is into all this stuff. So Let's talk about what Life Between Lives actually means and how Michael Newton discovered it.
Okay. And And then I do want to come back because my mom and I had some really interesting conversations. And then, of course, some interesting things happened after she passed or around her passing.
Sure.
If we have time.
Sure.
But what Life Between Lives hypnosis is and kind of how it was discovered is Michael Newton. A lot of people know Brian Weiss and past life hypnosis, and that he asked his client or patient to go to the source of their anxiety. And instead of going to like a childhood memory, she went to like a whole different life. And that's how Brian Weiss discovered past life hypnosis and then became really involved with it. Michael Newton sort of discovered it by accident as well, and that he asked a client to go to the source of her deep loneliness. And he had already kind of opened up, I believe. And he was a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, if I understand it correctly. And at least that's what because I've tried to ask the Newton Association, was he licensed? And from what I've gathered, I think he was. So he was a regular psychologist. And he asked someone to go to the source of her loneliness. And she didn't go to a past life. She went to the time in between lives. So heaven, basically. And on the other side, we don't just have a soul mate. Many of us have a soul mate, but we have a soul group, a soul family that we incarnate with over and over. But it's like I think you say repertory group where you change up roles, like in the theater, you change up roles each time.
Yeah.
But for us, we change up roles depending on what we want to learn each time. But we incarnate with the same folks to some degree repeatedly.
Yeah.
And she went to, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so she went to her soul group, but no one in that life, in the soul group had incarnated with her in this life. And that was the source of her loneliness. And so he, of course, was stunned and blown away. And so he stopped doing all his other work and did 7,000 straight sessions and researched it and found that people went to sort of the same similar basic places on the other side. And he wrote Journey of Souls and a bunch of other books. So that's how it was discovered. And that's who Michael Newton is. And he's passed on, I think, 5 years ago.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. So this is all based on the idea that we are, first of all, this is not our first time here,
right?
That we do pre-exist before we are born into these bodies is the way I kind of look at it. A word that I'm using more and more, and I really like, is avatar. I don't view this as even my body. This is my avatar. This is my representation in this physical plane. But we kind of come through. We have some control. We have some say. We do some planning. So these are concepts that I think can be very healing to people if they really understand it. They give us much more of a sense of autonomy, much more of a sense of purpose, much more of instead of why is this happening to me? It's like, why did I plan this? What's the lesson in this? So these are the benefits from this, because people might say, why do I care? And this, frankly, for a long time, when I heard about past lives and people were going to past lives, I'm like, I don't need that, because I'm living this life. And when I heard about Life Between Lives, I was kind of interested, but didn't really know how it would benefit me. So I love, talking to you and how you've used this, in your practice. And how does it benefit your clients in your practice?
Well, and boy, there were so many things you said I want to respond to. And I apologize. I'm going to grab a Kleenex. I have a little bit of sniffles today. So I wish I could use it as a marriage family therapist, but the state has really strict guidelines around what you can do as a therapist, marriage family therapist, a talk therapist in California. And this isn't part of it. And it's funny, in other countries, there's 200 plus Newton Institute certified hypnotherapists who can do this. And some of them in other countries, they're doctors and therapists, and it's included. Like my training mentor is in Germany, and it's included. She can do it under her medical license, but we're not there yet.
Right.
So I do it separately, though I wish I could, because I work a lot with trauma.
Right.
And I would never tell someone who's had a horrible trauma, I think you chose this ever. But when I've done hypnosis with people with trauma, sometimes we do kind of try to inadvertently find out, like, what's the purpose of all this? But as a hypnotherapist, I'm not limited in that way. So I have it as two completely separate things.
Sure.
And as you know, it can help you understand your life from the much bigger picture. Like I've always said, everybody makes sense when properly understood. So my job as a talk therapist is to sort of put the puzzle together of you to understand all the events, who you were, your kind of innate self, your personality, your gender, your everything. And then with life events, how that combined to make you you.
Yeah.
And so I do I always say detective work as part of being a talk therapist. But I was kind of overwhelmed when I learned about this because I was like, man, I'm a pretty good talk therapist and I kind of know how to get people from here to here. And now I have to look at, oh my gosh, it's not just this life. It's a whole bunch of lives. And okay, so I'm going to venture into yours a little bit now. Do I have your permission, by the way, to share about yours? Okay, because it is confidential, so people know. But I knew we were going to talk about it today. Yours was the first time I ever had your past life self show up in your soul group or in your, was it your soul group or your council? Do you remember?
It was in my soul group. Yeah.
I think it was your soul group.
Yeah. Soul group. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So oftentimes we'll explore multiple lives because a soul's working on something and we'll be like, well, have they had this before? And so it's the council, and those are your wise elders who oversee all your lives. And at some point in the session, we go there or some version of wise souls to get feedback, and people can bring their questions and about this life. But anyway, we often explore how this life fits within all the lives. But yours was the first where I had the past life selves actually show up. So do you remember that? Sometimes I remember more than you do. So that's why I want to check.
Yeah, no, I do. I wasn't sure what you were talking about first. But yes, one of my past life selves when I crossed over was there in the group that greeted me. Yes.
Yeah. And because I remember you said, but they're not really, and I've heard this before, but this is the first time I've had this in one of my sessions. You said, well, and they're not really past lives because they're all happening at once. But you said, I'll just kind of say it that way in the sense of Earth's time. Like you were kind of talking down for me a little bit, but you were letting me know that your other aspects of yourself, other lives you've led were showing up.
Yeah. And we'll get into that, my session, and what my experience was, but there is, and let's just talk about the sessions in general, because I want to make sure people are tracking where we are.
Okay. Sure.
So this was happened over 2 sessions. The first session was a past life regression where we just went into a past life, and I found a particular past life that had a lot of meaning for me, in this life. And I want to share with people what this experience is like, because I was telling Vondie when she called me up and said, okay, I'm going to do this. So one of the reasons I never tried it was because I was convinced that I was one of those people that could not be hypnotized. Because when we hear about hypnosis and we see it like on TV, there's like you make people bark like a dog or stand on one leg or, things like that. And I'm a very analytical, right brain or left brain kind of person. And I'm like, I'm just not going to be able to get into this thing I have to get into. So I have to say that I was wrong. It was really an interesting experience because I was fully conscious. I knew where I was. I knew what I was saying. But I was also very, very deeply relaxed, and to a point where I'm not normally. And even though I meditate, every day, it was even deeper than that. And I remember you saying to me, well, when you do this, you need to make sure you have a microphone because sometimes your voice gets so quiet that I can't hear you. And I'm like, that's not going to happen to me. But I got to a point where like you were asking me to talk and I just really didn't feel like talking. I was like, I guess I have to talk to her, but I was just into the experience. So we start off with the past life regression and we did that session. And then the next session, we do a past life, and then we go forward into the between lives. So that's kind of the sequence of how this happens. And, it was really interesting because, like I said, I was fully conscious the whole time. I knew what I was saying. I remember everything. But, I remember you saying sometimes people have this and they say, well, I feel like I just made the whole thing up because it's just my imagination. And it does kind of feel like that. But there was such an emotional connection to some of the events that happened. There were points where I literally could not talk because I was experiencing the death in one life of my mother and my father. And these are people that I thought I was just making up in my head, but I was very emotionally attached to what had happened. So to me, it was a very, very real experience. I just want to say that to everybody that, it felt like it was very beneficial. And I learned a lot about myself in this life. And I have to say, after the first session, even, and it was weird because things were going on in my outside life as this was going on too. So my 60th birthday just happened to be, I think it was between sessions. Yeah, it was between sessions.
Let me think. Yeah.
Yeah, we had the first one, then I had my birthday, and then we had the second one. So my 60th birthday was in there, and some other things that went on that just really made me feel a lot more, confident in my life and where I was. So by the time the second session came around, I was feeling, pretty good anyway. But I learned a lot, in the second session as well. So I do want to say to people, anybody that's considering this is thinking, I don't know if it's real. I don't know if this is just woo woo. It was a very real experience for me, and it was very beneficial in that. And it's been a couple of weeks since we had the last session. I'm still kind of processing some of it, but it's given me a whole, even though I've studied this stuff for a very long time and I talk about it all the time, and I believe in soul planning and soul groups and all that, it's just made it a lot more concrete for me, a lot more real for me, and maybe put this life kind of in perspective that it's a temporary thing and it's all part of a big plan.
Yeah. Well, and what's different is instead of you going to someone who then tells you about your loved ones or your soul group or whatever, you're telling me about your loved ones and your soul group. You're there connecting, getting the messages, and then relaying them to me. And like you said, sometimes people get so deep into the experience, it's hard to even use words. So sometimes we'll even communicate with a yes or no with like a finger or something at certain points, like in that part where I was relaxing you. Sometimes I'll say just nod your head to let me know.
Yeah. And like I said, that really worked. And the other thing, because you touched on this earlier, you talked about going to a medium and how that really impacted you. And I've heard this, and no offense to you as a professional therapist, but I've heard some people say that a good medium reading can be worth 10 years of psychotherapy, because you're feeling that you're getting that connection with the loved one. Well, this is like making yourself your own medium.
Right.
You can reach loved ones. You talk to your own guides. So you're reaching you're not, there's not someone sitting across a table telling you what your guide is saying. Right. Your guide is actually speaking to you. You're there experiencing this. And it was, that made it a very different experience for me. And I've had lots and lots of medium readings, and they're very, very helpful. But this was just like a whole level beyond that.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Well, and when I'm trying to think how to say this. When I had my sessions, they told me, you need to get trained in this. So after I did learned about it, I read all the books, and then I had my sessions, and they said, you need to do this and stop being a talk therapist. And we were in the process of moving up here to Ventura from LA County, which is just a couple hours away. But in my session, the person who was doing my session kept saying, well, but how is she going to earn a living? What is she going to do? And while I kind of get trained and develop all this. So I'm actually in the process of transitioning to just doing this, because when I found out about this, I was like, it to me, it just is so profound. And not that the other talk therapy isn't profound. It is. But I think it's just for my spirit. If it's like, I found my, this is what I'm called to do. And I've been doing the other for 30 years. And I value it, and I don't want to in any way denigrate it. But like you said, not that it makes up for 10 years of therapy, because sometimes people call me for an LBL and I'll end up seeing them in my marriage family therapy practice.
Sure.
Because I realize you need a lot of help with this life.
Yes.
Because the LBL is just, and LBL stands for Life Between Lives. It's a couple sessions, like you said. But when I found out about it, I was just like, I got to do this.
Yeah. When I said that, I just want to be clear. I was referring specifically to grief, that when sometimes people go to a therapist for grief, and going to a therapist for grief is frankly not necessarily helpful. Therapists definitely have.
And most therapists aren't trained in grief counseling. Right. So I went to a grief group that was volunteers who did it for free when I lost my mom. And I went to see a pet loss counselor when I lost my dog.
Yeah.
not a train. She was a therapist, but she was doing it again, kind of separate.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the only thing that made the grief bearable with my dog was the afterlife connection. Like I wanted to live on the other side, and I realized I chose this life and I need to live this life. But I would still be doing mediumship training if I could, except I wasn't that good at it.
Yeah, well, you're doing what you should be doing. I want to go back to something you said earlier because I think it's really, really profound. And I many years ago, I took a seminars course, whatever. It was a guy. I can't remember his name right now, but the thing was called "What You Are Is Where You Were When," and the whole idea was if you got to really know somebody, so what you are is where you were when. And if you got to know somebody and knew everything about them, then you could understand anybody. Because as you said so well, we come in with the set, there's the nature part of us. We come in with this innate stuff, but then there's all the things that happen to us. And you take these things, you add them up. People say nature versus nurture. No, it's both. And that makes us who we are. So understanding ourselves, we can look and say, well, I was born into this family and I've lived these experiences. That's why who I am. But even before you were born into this family, you come in with, I believe, other influences, past lives, to use that word. Again, there's no time on the other side. So, but for purposes of Earth life, we think of the life as sequential. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why this is so deeply profound for people, because a lot of us look at it and say, why was I born into the family I was born into? Why have I had the experiences I've had? Why do I feel like I've never fit in, in this world? I think it's a very common question that we have. And this can help answer some of those questions. You can sit down with your, and go through, when you go through the Life Between Lives, especially, and say, this is why you planned the life the way that you did it. And when you do the past lives, you can see themes recurring through your mm-hmm. different lives, and different things that you want to try out, or things you may think you didn't do as well in one life. So you want to give it another chance in this life.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. And you know what? I apologize. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. You're not picking it up, Brian?
No, not really. No.
Okay, good.
No.
Because I was thinking I could shut some doors so it's not so noisy in here.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Can I say a little bit about what you just said?
Yeah, absolutely. Your life? Yeah.
So one of the places that people often go is called the life body selection place. It's usually the last place they go before the session wraps up. And they can see the different options they had. Usually there's about 3 or 4 options, and why they chose the family, the life, sort of the trajectory. It's not all laid out because we have free will, mm-hmm. but they say, think of it as like potentialities or trajectories, that we I had someone say, and people have given me permission to share some of these things. Um, I had an option. One was like, I could be born in Africa, or I could be born to a group of just like regular folks trying to beat the odds. And I forgot what the third one was, but they chose the regular folks trying to beat the odds.
Mm-hmm.
Or one person had an option of being something really adventuresome, but because of how her past life, she was alone in her past life, she chose a family life. But the downside would be her freedom would be restricted. And she's kind of a freedom loving person. So literally they can see, like, some people see on a movie screen, and they can actually step into the movie and see how it feels. I had one guy who he called a futuristic warehouse with pods that you jump in and it shoots you off into a life. And he would jump in without looking. And one of his lessons was to like sort of explore a little more before he just threw himself in. And then one woman saw a room full of babies with Christmas tags. And she knew which one was going to be the baby that was going to be her. So we choose the scenario, not anyway. So that's something that's really fascinating to me.
So it brings up a couple of things. One is I wanted to ask you, because a lot of times we hear about past life regressions, and everybody was Cleopatra. Everybody was, everybody was royalty. No one has a mundane life. So what's your experience been with that?
So other than you and one other person, I've never had anybody have any historical figures in their life ever.
Okay.
So, and it does seem to be a little geographic specific. Oh, I was going to share about my husband. I'm trying to think if he would give permission. I'll just say he's from Europe, and his past life was in Europe. And a lot of the sessions I've done, people are either Native American or settlers. Like when we do their immediate past life or some of their past lives. Okay. But I've only had you and one person who also gave me permission to share, and she was Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's so funny because who she is today is like the most humble, modest. So she was completely blown away. And then, are you comfortable with me sharing your historical figure?
Yeah, sure.
Or do you want to share?
Well, it was Frederick Douglass, but it wasn't me. So it was someone else, which I don't want to share what that was, but it was someone else.
Okay. Yeah. And he was in an important moment in your past life.
Right.
Yeah. And then he ended up being someone in your soul group.
Yes.
Yeah. And I won't say who, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I think that's, like I said, that's interesting that your experience, because I was wondering, because like I said, everybody that talks about this, it's always like, I was a celebrity. I was this, or I was royalty. And it's, for me, so when you're doing this, again, I want to talk about the experience. For me, you were saying you're going back, and then you're here. And I was just picking the first thing that came to mind, because I was fully conscious and I was aware I could make choices is what I was doing. But I was like, okay, this is what feels right to me. This is what I'm experiencing. And like I said, it was interesting to see some of the patterns that were coming up, over and over again as we were going through the session, and the people that were playing different roles. And I love the way you said, like a repertoire, because we can only talk in metaphors. It's interesting. There's a guy, Bernardo Kastrup, who's, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a philosopher. He has written books on philosophy and idealism, the idea that everything is consciousness. And when we talk in allegories, is some things we can only speak about in allegory. We can't speak about them directly. We can only use metaphors. So I love using metaphors. So people might get tired of hearing saying, compare things to computer games or to, and I like the idea of a repertoire, because we are not the person we think we are right now. That's why I said I'm an avatar. I am a much more complex, much larger collection of beings, for lack of a better word, that happen to choose this one body, this time around, and we play different roles. So in my particular case, my daughter Shayna has played a couple different roles in my past, and she's always played a role, at least for the ones we went through, where she played a very difficult part of my life.
She took the hard roles. I remember them saying.
Yeah, she took the hard roles, and she took the roles where she was separated from me, and it launched me on into something else. my daughter Kayla would, play various roles in my life. And and they would play, similar types of roles, but different roles, in my life. So it makes you look at the people around you and just kind of wonders, like, what have we done before? There's a song, Kenny Loggins, I love music. There's a song called Sweet Reunion. And he talks about when he meets his soulmate. I always think about Shana when I hear the song now, but when he meets his soulmate, it's like, we've done this 1,000 times before. And it's like, she walks in and it's like, he immediately recognizes, not consciously, but subconsciously, it's like, I know we've done this before. Right. And I think that's such a cool concept when we think about our lives, that, this is not the first or only time we've been with people.
Right. Right. Well, and remember on the other side, we ask, what's your immortal soul name? Do you remember?
Yes, I remember asking it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember what it was? And you don't have to share unless you want to.
I'm not sure if I remember or not. Yeah.
And I have to confess, I peeked. I took a little notes during our sessions. I always do. I think is it right if it's Ashoka?
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of complicated because we're talking over there about the past life, Brian, today, Brian, and then the soul, Brian. So sometimes it's kind of like musical chairs as I'm talking to them and saying, well, how does this affect Brian? And how did this affect?
Yeah. It could get confusing, frankly, during the session, because you'd ask him, like, were you talking about me? Or are you talking about there? Because, and again, this is where I think that's why I consider this life to be an avatar. And another series of books I read, it was series of books called The Team. And I think she explains this very well, and that we're all part of a team, which is this thing we're talking about. But even more than that, our different avatars are all part of a team. And so it's like we're this being that comes in different ways, and then we share these experiences so that we don't all have to have the same experiences. So that's why I was able to, when I was in this Life Between Lives regression, I saw another soul, another avatar that I had been in a different life. So it could get very confusing, because we're like nested beings. We're like this, and then we're this, and then we're this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why I actually take notes, and I have up in the corner your name. I have past life 1 name, past life 2 name, because we do the past life for the first session. And then the second session is we go to your immediate past life, because we want to see what happens between the life right before this and before you chose to be Brian.
Yeah.
And then I have your guide's name. And so I have it all there up in my paper, so I can keep everybody straight and who I'm talking to and who the message is for when we're having the conversations.
Yeah. And I remember I was thinking about, as we talked about this, I remember when Peter Panagore had his near-death experience, and he went on the other side, and he heard like his real name, his soul name or whatever.
Soul name, yeah.
And I'm not, I think he said it wasn't pronounceable. I don't remember what it was. But, we have this, it's just the idea that I am not Brian and you are not Vondie. And I really, so how does this apply practically? When I look at people, I'm having conversations with them, I'm like, well, this is kind of avatar to avatar. It's soul to soul on one level, but it's also avatar to avatar, and we're not really, who we think we are. And it makes it easier for me to accept, for example, my daughter Shana, who has transitioned out of her avatar, to know that in one sense we're still together. On the other side, we are literally still together at this moment. And on the other, and I'm going to see her again. So that's how this stuff actually plays out in day-to-day life, when we can just carry this life more loosely, when we can not take it, quite so seriously, and say, everything's going to be okay. It's really what it all comes down to.
Right. Well, and something you said, I was going to say about, you're still together over there. We only bring a percentage of our soul's essence into any given life. So usually 30 to, let's say, 60%. So you're still over there while you're here with Shana, and you're also doing other things. So you're not just there and here. You're also, people are sometimes on other planets. There's even a thing, this is going to get kind of out there, where people are in 2 bodies on Earth, kind of at the same time or overlapping times.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So we only bring, a percentage to this life, and we're over there. We're very busy. In fact, in this perspective, well, actually, were you going to say something before I change topics? In this perspective, that's real life, and this is school. So
Right.
we're over there in school, we're making energy, we're working in labs, we're creating life, we're doing all these things. And then, we're coming here to, they call it like, this is your field work or your practicum. I want to try out having more compassion. So that's why you come to Earth. There's a lot of much easier places to incarnate, but Earth is like, the tough school, advanced. So to all your people out there, you were the brave ones. The person who did my sessions told me that you were the brave ones, or I heard him say it in a talk. So this is a hard life because there's a lot of suffering.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even the terminology we use for life between lives, it's actually the other way around.
Right.
This is the that break. This is the school. This is the obstacle course. This is the video game. This is all those analogies you want to use. This is not the real world. And I know this sounds woo to say this, but scientists are telling us now. They're like, a lot of philosophers and scientists are arguing about, is this place real or is it a simulation? Are we at a hologram? And there's a lot of evidence that this world is really basically a projection, that there's something that lies underneath it that creates it, that props it up, that supports it. But it's like, if you're a Star Trek fan, it's like being on the holodeck. This is not real life. It feels very well. And I tell people, this is a totally immersive experience. This is like, you stepped into the best VR that there ever is. Because it's not only sight and sound, but it's also touch and emotion and all this stuff. And it feels very, very real. But from the other side, they're like, this is the simulator. And you're only there for a very short time. And getting back to the session, because I could talk about this all day, but getting back to what this LBL does for you is it allows you to expand that picture out of even the life that you're in right now. And to say, I'm going to take it a little bit easier. I'm not going to take it so seriously. I'm going to, I chose to come here to have this experience. And so whatever it is I experience, it's going to be, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, and at one point I asked some questions of the council through you about kind of how were you doing? And usually I get, well, he's doing this or he's doing better or he needs to do more work or whatever. And yours, I don't know if you remember this, you said, there's no judgment here. It's all just experience. Like they were very clear, like we're not evaluating you. It's just all experience. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. And I think it's very important because a lot of times, well, even in our Christian background and in this, it's all, we have to achieve, and I hear people use the term even today, I'm being tested. And I'm like, testing implies, first of all, pass, fail. And it implies we don't know. And I tell people that are going through these experiences, I'm like, you can't fail. Whatever it is that happens, you can't fail. You can choose how you're going to deal with this. And the outcome is, you kind of already know. It's just, this is really more of it's a challenge. It's like, I want to see how this goes out. But it's not a pass fail thing. It's no one's going to, you don't go back and get an A or a B or a C or, since you got an A, you're allowed to move on to the next level. But if you got a C, you've got to go back and do it again. And that's another. I have a poor friend. I remember when she and I were in a group of people who were ex-Christians. We were coming out of it, and we first started talking about reincarnation. And she said, every time I hear about reincarnation, I just start crying. And I said, why? She said, my life has been so hard. And her life had been. It had been impossibly hard. She goes, why would I ever do this again? Why would someone make me come back? And I said, I think it's very important. We don't have to come back here.
Right. And I was just going to say, my mom said the same thing. Is I said something about maybe you'll choose a easier life next time around. She said, do I have to do this again? I mean, her life was so incredibly hard. And I said, no, you don't have to, they don't make you come back.
Right.
And in fact, as the souls advance, they stop reincarnating or incarnating. And so the council, they're usually not incarnating anymore. And the higher up. Well, and it's not higher up like judgment higher up. It's more just they've done more.
Yeah.
So even though there's different roles, it's not like there's a value on further or not far. Oh, I was going to say something else about the judgment, but what were you going to say?
I wanted to point out there's another reason why people incarnate. People sometimes incarnate for other people. So they're to a point where they don't feel like they need to incarnate anymore,
Right.
but they choose to come back for a particular purpose or for the greater good.
Yes.
So there are people, I believe they're called bodhisattvas, that say, yeah, I'm gonna come back, and I'm doing this for other people. So the idea of, I just want to say one more thing, I'll let you go. But when everybody I know that's in helping parents heal, almost every single to a person said, I'm never doing this again. And I used to say that myself. And I'm like, I don't say that anymore, because it's like when you go out and you drink too much, and you get hungover and you say, I'm never going to drink again. You do it again. And so once we get back to the other side, and once we, kind of decompress, and we realize it wasn't that big of a deal, there was no real jeopardy, then we say, yeah, I'm going to do it again. So I don't say that anymore.
Yeah. It's funny. You said so many things. I was like, oh, I want to respond to that. But, yeah. Okay. So yes, most of the time. So one of the questions we ask before people come back in is, were you eager to come back, indifferent, or didn't want to come? Mm-hmm. And most are eager to come back. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I was going to say was, for some reason, I've been getting a fair number of advanced souls, and hopefully this won't embarrass you, but there were some signs that you would fit into that category. The sign being that you skipped the orientation and you went straight to your soul group. Usually your guide meets you right when you cross over, kind of like the past life session. But the souls who know where they're going, they just go to one of the places. They don't need like a reorientation. Mm-hmm. Anyway, hopefully that doesn't make you uncomfortable. But I've been getting people, I had someone who was a council member, and they don't incarnate anymore. They've stopped incarnating a long time ago. But when it was time to start asking questions, and I was trying to get her to go to her council, the message was, put your book away. Because we have a book of, at this place you ask this, at this place you ask this. And then obviously we freelance too. Mm-hmm. But they said, put that book away. This soul is not there for her advancement. She's there for everybody else. And the whole council, in fact, she, on the other side, it's all love and we're all one. Mm-hmm. She would refer to herself as we. She didn't even speak as I when she got over there, really, with the council. Mm-hmm. But she said, it took me a while to figure out what was going on. Mm-hmm. I had to say, well, what do you do? And I help people plan their lives. And I finally figured out she was on a council, and the whole council had incarnated among us for our benefit here on Earth.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've had a fair number of those recently.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's really cool. And I think it could be freeing for people, again, because we've had this idea, whether it's from Christianity of, final judgment from God, or whether it's from near-death experiences, the life review, which a lot of people, they actually confuse those two things, because near-death experiences tell us over and over again, you're only evaluating yourself. But some people still fear that life review. And I think we need to really understand, we don't have to worry about that. It's actually, I like what, Jesus said about storing up treasures for yourself in heaven. The way I look at it now is, every time I do a good deed, I'm like, this is going to be cool in my life review. So that's the way I look at my life review. I'm like, what cool things, what kind of little cool things can I leave for myself, when I get there? So that's been very helpful for me.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and my voice is doing okay. I know I said I was having trouble. So if I can go a little more if you want to, but if you need to wrap up, I'm good too.
No, we're doing, we're fine.
Okay. Can I share? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Well,
I had two things kind of in response to that, two different sessions I wanted to share, but one, they're opposite. So one was very affirming and one was a little less so. Is this okay with you if I share both?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, because it kind of doesn't fit with what you were saying. So I want to be respectful. But the first one was a friend of mine. I did his session, and it turned out he was a young soul. I think I did a session when I was doing my training even. But it turned out he was a young soul. And when he crossed over, he felt really bad about his past life, that it didn't go well, or he didn't make enough of himself. And they were like, you're good. Don't worry about it. And his counsel said that. His guide said that. They kept given him the message over and over in every different way they could think of. And finally they said, this is my favorite thing. And sometimes we can hold on to these things for us, even if the message was given to somebody else, it's also for us. And they said, I still remember it. We don't care how well you do. We just care about you. Our answer will always be, you're doing fine. You're doing wonderfully. Like they didn't even want to evaluate the last life.
Right.
Like, we don't care how well you do. We just care about you. Because he kept being hard on himself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the way I believe it is. So what was the other experience?
Okay. Yeah. So the other one was the opposite. And, we're trained in all the sessions. It's all love. Anyway, I'll just cut to the chase. This was the most interesting session I've ever done. And it was someone who originally wasn't going to give me permission to share because they're very private. But afterwards I said, you have to give me permission to share this. And she did. So she crossed over and her guide was pissed at her. And sometimes the guides joke with people and joke with me. But he was like, come here, come over here, come here. And he said her name was Come Here. And she was a Wall Street broker in the crash. And after the market crashed, she kind of just gave up on life. And so they said, well, first of all, the guide said, you need to go right back in because you wasted that life. So two things. He was pissed and he told her to go right back in. I was trained and told in all the other sessions, thousands and tens of thousands of sessions people have done. It's all love and you never go right back in. The whole point of Life Between Lives is all the things we do on the other side. He said, you need to go right back in. And so we went to the place of life body selection and they were like, well, we don't know what to do with this soul because there's workers there because you don't go right back in. So long story short, I asked some questions and they finally went to a wise person who could help us. And it was Mr. Mighty, who was like a cross between a king and Santa Claus, like a big figure. And she said, you go to him like going to the principal's office when you're in trouble. And I'm like flipping through my book of questions, like, this is not in here. And he said, basically, if you don't straighten up, you're not going to be allowed to incarnate anymore. And because you've been wasting your lives and they're supposed to keep ending better and they're ending miserably. And so again, I'm like, what the hell? This is not supposed to be like this. I literally kept thinking they were going to joke with me or something. But finally they said, in this life, she's too serious. And Mr. Mighty apologized for like scaring her straight and told her. So the message turned out to be about love, like to relax, ease up. It's okay. But initially I was like, this is wrong. This is not what they told me. And I think that was one of my training sessions too. So I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very interesting experience. And I'm glad you relayed that because you had said in the notes before we got started that this is kind of like having an NDE without having the NDE. And so we talk about all the positive NDEs, and there are some that we call less than positive. And so we can't throw those out. My personal opinion about less than positive experiences is people get what they need.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people need that less than positive experience. It's not a permanent thing. Nobody goes to hell. And I think it's really interesting. The people that even go to hell in their NDEs always get out before they even in the NDE. As soon as they ask for help, they're always taken out. And the other thing is these sessions are, there's a lot of projection that we're doing because our psyche is involved. So they're not, it's not perfect. It's not objective. So I think in that case, my guess would be this is what this woman felt like she needed that experience of being, scared straight, for lack of a better word. But I think about, there've been a handful of people that have had, I think it's like 8 or 10% of people that have NDEs are less than positive. But it's interesting they usually have a positive outcome. And I remember I think it was PMH Atwater when I interviewed, she was saying one time she was giving a lecture and someone stood up and they'd had like a really heavenly NDE, like the best one ever. And they were miserable because they felt like they had been rejected and they were sent back and they thought life sucked. Another person stood up, they had a hellish NDE and they were so grateful for it because they said it really taught them that they really needed to buckle down and focus on their life. So I believe people get what they need in their experiences. And in my case, I thought it was interesting because, like with my lives, you would say, well, how did that life go? And the couple I had, I'm like, it went fine. I thought it went great. I didn't have any feeling like I mean, I remember in the one life, I actually was too hard on myself. I thought I should have done more. That was
Right.
the lesson I took out of that life. So I think everybody gets what they need in these experiences,
Yeah.
and there's room for a variety of things. And it's interesting that person, even though they had a quote negative experience, realized this was what I needed.
Right. And it ultimately wasn't a negative experience. And it's funny because their soul group was like a rogue soul group. Like they were smoking, drinking. Their names were Come Here and Roger That and Hell Yeah. I mean, it was a renegade soul group.
Yeah.
So even though it wasn't negative, it was just different than what I expected.
Right.
But they were fine with it. Like the guide was like pissed, like, get over here. And they thought it was funny. I mean, so this soul kind of just wasn't taking anything seriously.
Right. Exactly. And
but ultimately it was love. Like she went into Mr. Mighty's arms and he hugged her and said, child, and she said, thanks for giving me so many chances. And it was beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing about when we say positive and negative. And that's why when I talk about NDEs, I say less than positive, because I don't believe anything is negative. Once we get a higher perspective on it, once we really look at it, and including the things that happen in this life, everything that happens to us, something good comes out of it. I literally believe that everything that happens is some sort of good comes out of it. And it's just a matter of how we choose to look at it.
Right. And also you have to remember on that side, like you said, time is different. This is like a 20-minute journey compared to everything over there.
Yeah.
And when the soul group comes back together and people come in from their journeys, they sit around and kind of talk about it. And how was yours? And how'd you do? And maybe I could have done this or that. But this is like, a blink.
Yeah.
Compared to the time over there. Okay. So I know we're kind of running long and you probably want to wrap up so people don't have such a long thing to listen to, but can I ask a little bit more about yours? Because we said we were going to process yours a little bit.
And we've got as much time as we need.
Okay. I'll just keep taking sips of water. Mm-hmm. So what would you say, how did it fit with your expectations? And what would you say was the big takeaway for you?
Okay. As far as how it fit with my expectations, again, I didn't know, because I've heard people describe things, and I thought when I was reading about these, like it's like you're literally in these experiences, like you're feeling and seeing things. That's the way some people describe it. For me, it was more like my imagination. It was like if I closed my eyes, I could think about this, but it was the first things that came to me. It was a lot more emotional, especially the first one when I was in it, than I expected it to be. And then the second one, when I got to the in between lives part, became very emotional for me. And I truly believe that things are coming into my life when they're supposed to come into my life. So, the fact that you happen to, ask me to do this, it happened to be like right around my 60th birthday. I'm going through a transition in my life right now in terms of my career, similar to what you're going through. I'm like, this is what I want to do. How am I going to make any money doing this? And so it really lifted a lot of that burden, from me. As I thought about it afterwards, I did have that feeling like, okay, maybe you were just making that up. But then again, the emotional connection that I got, and some of the surprises of some of the things that happened, the people in my life. I mean, in my previous life, I was a white woman and I was a slave owner.
Yes.
And when you brought me to that place and you're like, okay, you're there. I'm like, whoa. I did not expect to be, a slave owner. It'd be the last thing that I would want to be anyway.
On a plantation, no less.
Yeah, on a plantation. So it's so as I've gone through it, I'm having to learn to just lean into it and trust that it was real, and what can I take from it. And it's been very helpful. It's been extremely helpful. I'm really glad that I did it. And I would encourage people that are thinking about it, that especially if you have hangups about your life, like, why am I going through this? Or why does this always happen to me? Why does my life suck so bad? Because some people think, they're just the most unlucky people. Mm-hmm. I think it can really help you to answer that. And I forgot who it was that said, if a man has a why, he can endure anyhow. We can endure anything as long as it makes sense to us.
Mhm.
So as long as if someone can tell me, yeah, you're suffering, but you're suffering for a reason, that something good's going to come out of this, I think that's the most helpful thing that we can learn.
Yeah. Well, and the really advanced souls that are, so as I said, the more advanced the soul, the harder the life. I mean, they're working on compassion, and that's why they're suffering. And again, I would never tell somebody, you chose this horrible whatever. But, when I see somebody homeless or, and it doesn't mean I turn away or something, but just, and that doesn't mean we're not supposed to do something about it.
Right.
But just, or people with really serious mental illness. I mean, those are the big leagues people, for sure.
It's kind of like the concept of karma. I mean, and I don't believe in karma the way some people believe in it. Like, you do something bad, something bad happens to you. But for people that believe that, it can be used as an excuse. You can look at someone and say, that person's poor because they deserve to be poor because they screwed up in a past life. And that's what that's what the people around Jesus believed. And they said, why was this man born blind? Well, was it because his father sinned or because he sinned?
Right.
And which is interesting because it implies reincarnation, because
exactly. I was just going to say that. Right.
But Jesus said, no, it's neither one of those things. It's not, I don't view it as punishment. And I also tell people, even if you believe that someone chose this life, maybe they chose it so you could show compassion.
Right.
So it's not an excuse to leave anybody in a bad state.
Right.
And it's not a saying you deserve this thing or you chose this, so I'm going to leave you there. It doesn't mean we don't fight. It doesn't mean we don't fight all the injustice in the world.
Right.
I mean, because that's what we're here for. We're here to have something to push against. So that person that is disabled or that person that is poor doesn't mean you leave them. Maybe your job is to lift them up.
Well, and that might be why they chose that for not just for their advancement, but for us to develop compassion and sympathy or courage or whatever it is that we're needing. Because all of this, so much planning goes into this. All of this was sort of put in place for everybody. Oh, sorry, hit the mic. There's all these different soul groups, and then there's other soul groups that are nearby, like cluster groups, and it's all kind of set in motion. And then what we do with it is up to us. But sorry, I hit it again.
Yeah, well, that brings up another really, really important point. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I don't want to identify it, but I was talking to a friend. And I have a lot of friends who have lost children. So it was a friend that lost a child, really struggling with getting back into life, and not living for themselves. And the concepts I've learned from this, I've learned from the team books I've been reading. What I said to this person is like, we don't live for ourselves. And when I heard that concept in the team books, that I'm living to have an experience to share with everybody else when I go back, it's not just about me. So the problems I'm going through, whether I'm disabled, whether I'm poor, whether I'm sick, whether I'm wealthy and just a total ass, it's not just for me. And then also I look at that person who is that total ass. I'm like, maybe they're playing that role for our benefit, and I can have a little bit of compassion for that person and say, maybe this is the role that it could be an extremely advanced being that's saying, I'm going to play this role. We don't know, because it's a very, very tangled web. It's not a simple thing.
Though the general rule is the less advanced souls, sorry, I want to be careful I say this. They're mostly concerned about having a life where they look good and are successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean we shouldn't look good or be successful. But again, the more advanced souls are, they're choosing the tough lessons. And again, I haven't lost a child, so I can't even begin to imagine the pain.
Well, everybody thinks, initially your first thought is, why would I choose a tough life? And I remember this is before I even knew anything about soul planning. I had no clue. I was my early 20s, and I was talking to the woman I was dating at the time. And I said, why would anybody ever choose to be born a black man in America? Because we were talking about, being black or being white. And, she was saying, you wish you were white or something. And I said, yeah, why wouldn't I? Well, I mean, why wouldn't I choose an easy life? But once we develop a deeper understanding of what life is, and now here I am 35, 40 years later, and I'm very happy to be who I am. I would not have learned the lessons that I've learned if I had not, been born as a black man in the early 1960s. So it's helped me to really develop character. So when we're on the other side, we're making these choices. We're like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that, because we're not worried about fame or wealth or stuff like that, because we know it's meaningless. We know it means absolutely nothing.
Right. Well, and we're bringing back this learning to enrich the collective divine, or whatever you want to call it over there, which is us.
Yeah.
You know, so we're off learning these things for our own soul's advancement, but also, you know, there's things over there that can't happen because there's no suffering. So we grow here.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in the show Star Trek, and when they talk about the Borg, they're always represented negatively. But the thing about the Borg is they live for the collective, and every experience, if I remember correctly, adds to the experience of the whole. And people think sometimes this is blasphemous when we say that we're God, but Jesus said that we're gods. And so we are little fractals of God, and God has divided God's self up into all these billions of fractals that have these experiences. And each experience that we have is an experience that leads back to the collective, that benefits everything. And we're all part of that.
I agree.
So
my favorite. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
My favorite saying is something about enlightenment, when the drop of water realizes it's the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it's kind of an intense concept, and it's maybe kind of difficult to grasp at first, but the more that you grok it, I mean, it's something you can't understand on an intellectual level. You just have to accept it intuitively. But the more that you start to accept that, you'll start to look at everybody and everything differently. I mean, literally the world would change for you, overnight. I posted something yesterday. It was a joke about how people talk to themselves. It's like, yeah, I talk to myself, and then we laugh. And I said, the thing is, once you truly understand who you are, you'll never be alone again. You'll never, because you'll know that your guides are with you, your loved ones are with you, your higher self is there. You're watching yourself as you're doing this thing. Like when you're playing a video game, you're sitting on the couch and Mario is running across the screen and you're controlling Mario. You're the one sitting on the couch. You're not Mario.
Right. Well, that's why, I fell in love with this. As soon as I heard about it, I was like, okay, I'm not a gifted medium, but I know how to do hypnosis. I was already doing it as a talk therapist. So I was like, I think this is my thing. And it just opened up this whole new world for me. And I've kind of never looked back. Yeah. And one of the benefits is I get to meet people like you, and I process your experience afterwards. I grow and learn. And so thank you for trusting me and taking that journey.
Well, I want to say this about that, because I study NDEs like crazy, and a lot of people that do. And I believe, again, everything's for everybody. So in an NDE or in a Life Between Lives sessions, there's stuff that's unique and there's stuff that's universal. So we could all benefit from, learning these things and studying these things and hearing the wisdom, that comes from the other side. So yeah, we are starting to run a little bit long. So anything you'd like to say that you didn't get to say before we wrap up?
Not really. Just back to what I said in the beginning. It is all love. Even the session that was a little bit unusual, the message was ultimately about love and oneness. It's all the same on the other side.
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to believe that it could be so simple, and people hear that over and over again, but that's what you hear from everybody that's, had those types of experience. Vondie, I want to thank you for reaching out to me and for doing this with me and letting me have the experience, and for sharing with my audience. Let people know where they can reach you.
My website, lovebetweenlives.com.
Okay. And the name is Vondie Lozano. It's VONDIE LOZANO. That'll, of course, be in the show notes. There'll be a link to Vondie's website in the show notes. Again, if you're even thinking about doing something like this, I really encourage you to do it, to do yourself a favor and take the leap.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grieftogrowth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief, the number 2, growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.